see so many people came out tonight to hear this story. And I'm sure that everyone has a television, at least one. And over the last couple of months, we have seen a number of hurricanes, a huge fire in California, in Mexico City, and earthquakes that have literally... So I'm a little surprised I couldn't hear me back there. So here we are. Can you see that? Can you actually kind of smell and feel and get into that moment a little bit? Because that's what it was like. That's what it's like for the people who live in Puerto Rico and Florida and Houston, Mexico City, California, and Kingston in 1777. Well, how did this all come about? How did Kingston, the first capital of New York State, come to be burned to the ground on October the 16th as part of what? As part of the Revolutionary War. What the heck was the Revolutionary War? Well, once upon a time, we were all colonists and pledged our allegiance to King George, whichever one, the third at this time, and we were owned by another country. If you study sociology, and I have extensively, and was on my way to being a college professor once upon a time, but you will know that England sent its riffraff to the colonies. It was, if you were a criminal, which it didn't take a whole lot to do, England would ship you overseas to the colonies rather than hang you up. If you were a pickpocket, if you were destitute, if you were blind or crippled, send them to the colonies. We need colonists because we, the landowners of England, own a lot of land, and we need people to settle on it in order to prosper and make us money. It was one of the reasons why colonials were never considered as good as real Englishmen, because their stock, and remember at the time, people bred horses, they bred cattle, they bred dogs, and they thought that people were a lot the same way. You know, you have breeding, you have bloodlines, you have things that carry with you. Learning was not as important as your bloodline. So we were all put a second class. But we helped England a great deal in huge conflicts over much of the 1600s and much of the 1700s with France. They were fighting like crazy to control North America. And we, the residents of Kingston, marched as provincial troops along with British regulars, and in the very last French and Indian War, because there were about 4, we managed to, with British, defeat the French, and the country was Great Britain's. France was no longer a major power. What did that mean? Well, it meant that England owed a whole lot of money, and they needed to recoup that. And to get that back, they decided that they would tax the colonies. Well, you've heard taxation without representation. Well, what does that actually mean? Well, we were taxed, but we were taxed by our own legislatures, by people we elected and put there, and we agreed with that taxation. Parliament, which exists across the ocean, is not entitled to tax us. We did not send anyone to Parliament. And if we had, they would just overrule everything we wanted. And there was no way in the world this was right. This was tyranny. Where does the concept of tyranny come from? Well, if you read the Bible, you know that there is this pact between God and man. And if man obeys God's rules, God makes man prosper. That was translated very quickly into government, where there was a contract between the king and the populace. And if the populace obeyed the king's rules, well, then the king would do things for the populace. If the king got out of line, then the populace not only could, but had the obligation to overthrow that king. Divine right is a big thing to overthrow. And by the time England got done putting taxes on us that we disagreed with, and started limiting our ability to travel and do the things that we really felt we wanted to do, all kinds of things begin to happen. Militias are formed. These are your local army, your local military group. When you're 16 years old, you're automatically in the militia. You're supposed to have many things in the militia. You have a firelock, you have powder, which is back here, and you're expected to bring some kind of an edged weapon, which I have over here. We know about the Lexington and Concord thing. Anybody that still believes that we won the war because we stood behind the trees and the rocks, we shot the British who were out in the front, wrong. Never happened that way. We didn't win anything. The only great large-scale battle that was conducted that way was the British retreat from Concord and Lexington back to Boston in April of 1775. And those militia were highly trained. These were not just farmers out there who ran in with their own guns and shot at the British. They were highly trained. They were ready for this. And the war was on. You could put the war as beginning at many points, but we call it there. By the time 1777 rolls around, that feels better. It's warm. By the time 1777 rolls around, Great Britain has a master plan to cut the colonies into pieces so that they can then defeat them as one piece at a time, rather as unified. And probably most of us have read about the gentleman John Burgoyne, who comes out of Canada, Howe, who's supposed to come up from New York City, and Barry St. Ledger, who's supposed to come in from Fort Oswego all the way up the Mohawk Valley. They all meet at Albany and cut the colonies in half so that those nasty people, the Yankees up there in New England, can't really cooperate very well with those in New Jersey and Pennsylvania and the southern colonies. Well, as it turns out, Billy Howe decides that he's not going to go up the river. He's going to go and he's going to take Philadelphia, which is the capital of these new United States. It is often seems to be said that it seems that Lord Germain, who was in charge of all this, was supposed to send him a letter telling him explicitly that he was supposed to go up the Hudson River to cooperate with these two other people, and it never really got sent. There's other historians who will say, no, he got it, he just decided to do what he was going to do. So all that troops that came out of New York City by that time, 76, George Washington had lost the Battle of Long Island, White Plains. He retreated to New Jersey. The British had New York City. They had troops. They could send them up there. Barry St. Ledger is a different kind of a campaign altogether. He has a lot of loyalists, and he has a lot of Indians that are coming down along the Great Lakes, down into Oswego. And for anybody who may graduate from Oswego, besides me and Al Roker, yes, he did. That's a very historic town, even though there's not, it doesn't have that same level of history right now. But during the French and Indian War and the American Revolution, that was a very important town. So he came down through there, and he got hung up at Fort Stanwix. Stanwix is near Rome, New York. It's still recreated there. And he laid siege to that, expecting that that place was going to be all run down and the logs would be falling off the place and there wouldn't be any soldiers. Nope, there was a Continental regiment there that had rebuilt that whole thing, and it was well fortified, well stocked, ready for a siege. He ran into that with all those native troops and those Tory troops, and Native Americans, that is not their style. They don't really fight very well. Hanging around, sitting in trenches, trying to approach a thing. That's not what they do. Let me for a second set this aside. We're going to get to some of that. I usually move around a whole lot. So this kind of thing is a little bit disconcerting because I'm going to make myself up short. So he comes down, he lays siege to Fort Stanwix in order to relieve Fort Stanwix, that is, get rid of this threat. The 3rd Tryon County Militia, about 800 strong, march out and march down along the Mohawk and to a place called Oriskany. And Oriskany is an Indian name. It was also an area where there was a ravine, a steep ravine, and the road led into that ravine with steep sides on it and out the other side. This was Nick Herkimer, who was the general in charge, and he led his men down into that ravine, and unknown to him, on either side were those Tories and Indians. And they opened fire. The Battle of Oriskany was one of these things that was actually kind of fought to a standstill, but the loss was horrendous. Out of those 800 militia, by the time people had died of wounds and such, even years later, because sometimes you lingered on for a considerable amount of time, about 500 of those 800 men had died either directly as a result or as a peripheral result of Oriskany. But what happened while they were out ambushing the 3rd Tryon County militia, those Continentals, because there was almost nobody in that British camp, they took off out there and they stole everything blind. They pulled everything out of the tents, they dragged it back in the fort, they took the supplies, they took all the gunpowder they could find, they took the possession of the natives, and they closed up that fort again. Back comes the Loyalists and the natives, and they, what the heck is going on here? They are furious, but this is a very strong fort now, and they can't breach it, and of course this is not, breaching walls is not a Native American tactic, so they're not going to do that. We have a very curious person in the history of the United States and in the Revolutionary War named Benedict Arnold. If he had not done himself hooked up with a Tory lady called Peggy Shippen in Philadelphia, who was from a really nice Tory family, much younger than him, and married her, I guess she was somewhat enthralled by this battle-scarred veteran who was probably only in his 30s, but she was about 17. We might have had a whole different kind of idea about who Benedict Arnold was. Benedict Arnold was one heck of a Revolutionary War hero, but such an egotist that he came to a point where apparently Peggy had had a great deal of influence. He decided to shift sides and get even more recognition from the British. We know about the almost losing West Point, et cetera, like that. But right at this time, Benedict Arnold is a hero. He takes a couple of regiments of Continental Line and starts marching out along the Mohawk. Now, there's a guy who I share part of a name with. His name was Hans Jost Schuyler. He was a bit crazy. The natives saw him as being somewhat holy because, when you're crazy, they respect a little bit. You must have some connection to God, unlike us, right? And so Arnold says, okay, I want to tell you, look, take a look around here. You see all those soldiers? There are more soldiers here than there are leaves on trees. I want you to go ahead, go down there, go into the British camp. You tell them what's coming. So he goes down. Now he's got a couple of regiments of Continentals at that time. Maybe he had 800-900 men. But Hans Jost goes down there, and he says, they're coming in as many as leaves on trees like that. The natives say, yeah, that's not for us. They split, and at that point, most of Barry St. Ledger's force is now gone. It's neutralized. The natives are going home. They've lost everything they had in camp. They're not getting any booty. They haven't taken that fort. They're not divvying up any spoils of war. They've lost it all. And so they split, which leaves Mr. Singler, actually, I think he was a colonel, leaves him without really an army. So he packs it up and precipitously leaves. So there goes nobody coming up the Hudson. There's nobody coming in the Mohawk Valley. There's only John Burgoyne coming down out of Canada, and which he comes, actually the way that all the water flows, he's coming up Lake Champlain and Lake George and approaching Saratoga. As he does that, his supply line gets longer and longer. So it's a little harder to get food and such. He's got quite a number of Native Americans, but he's got Hessian soldiers and he's got British regulars, and they're all marching down through there. The American militia, that's us guys, begin to assemble. General Gates has thrown up fortifications near Saratoga, and we're getting ready for that. There's all kinds of things happening that are bringing these militia in. At the final result, I thought there was something like 16,000 militia there. But one of the things that did happen that myth says helped precipitate this, there was a young lady named Jeanne of Gray. She was supposedly a rather good-looking, red-headed woman, and red hair, in some of these things is a real standout, so a lot of people are red-headed. And she was actually the fiancée of a Tory officer who was marching down with Burgoyne. She was supposed to be escorted to the British lines by a group of natives, but somehow they had a falling out about who was doing what. They killed her, and they scalped her. And she has several graves up around Stillwater area. Began moving things around and brought that into camp. And at that point, her fiance recognizes that red hair, and there's all kinds of, there's hell to be paid. But Burgoyne is a little bit reluctant to do that with the natives, because those people could just as easily turn around and decide, hey, a British coat's as good as an American coat, let's take that one. And he could have been in big trouble. So he kind of pacifies that and proceeds on down to Ticonderoga, where the American forces, Ticonderoga is a lousy place to put a fort. If you've ever gone there, it looks like it's a really terrific spot, but you got nowhere to go. And people can surround you very easily and then just starve you out. Well, American General St. Clair realizes we're cooked. And he gets all his people in the dead of night across the bridge over to the side that's now Vermont, and he manages to escape. But Burgoyne is sending troops after him. They want to chase him down. They want to destroy this part of the army. They don't want this to collect down there in Saratoga and make an even larger American army. So he sends troops after them. In a place called Hubbardton in Vermont, which is a real mountainside, hilly, wild area, there's one heck of a fight goes on. And it's kind of a stalemate. But John Burgoyne's troops, are depleted by those he's lost during that time. He proceeds further. He comes to a little area where what we now call the Battle of Bennington, which actually happened near Hoosick in New York State. And he sends out, among others, a company of Hessians who are dragoons. They got these really heavy leather boots that are actually better for riding in, but they get to the area around Bennington, and he runs into John Stark. John Stark is no pushover. John Stark is a battle-hardened regular from the French and Indian War days, and he commands a lot of these kind of backwoodsy kind of guys that we all think about as being pretty tough, and they work. They just fight the heck out of these Hessians. They're practically obliterated. Bennington is a great American victory, and John Burgoyne is again reduced by his troop strength as he keeps moving more and more towards Saratoga, where he runs into General Gates and, among others, he's got a lot of Continental Line people, but there is the 1st Ulster County Militia. That's the group that I represent, and that group was raised here in Kingston, Saugerties, and Woodstock area. Most of those men were up there, or they were south of here toward West Point, down at Forts Montgomery and Clinton. Around General George Clinton, and remember there's a British General Henry Clinton who commands down in New York City. George has got those 2 forts fortified, and Gates has got Saratoga fortified. There's 2 battles at Saratoga. There's one on September 19th, which is something of a stalemate, and there's another one October 7th, in which the Americans are quite victorious. Now there is a really interesting thing that happened during that second battle. There is a general, a Scott general on the British side, named Fraser. He is a dynamic general. He's leading troops. He's on a horse. And so the sort of semi-legend goes, Daniel Morgan, who commanded a company and a regiment of riflemen. Now rifles, I'm going to have to set this down so I can show you what this really looks like. Yeah. This is a smoothbore fowling piece. This is like a musket. That means that down the barrel, it's smooth like a shotgun. Now we're going to do this here. This is just a standard safety measure to show you all. Nothing in there, completely unloaded. This is what a musket looks like. It functions the same way, whether it's a military gun, whether it's a civilian gun. It's a flint lock. This is the flint. It's a piece of rock. Here's a steel portion. It's spring-loaded. This is now called the frisson. This little portion down here is the pan. It's like a little depression on the side of the lock. There's a small hole through here called the flash hole, and that goes directly into the main charge. If you're going to load one of these things, remember, you say, why do everybody stand out in the fields and, just shoot at each other? Technology. This was the ultimate technology in firearms of the time. basically creates a spark which falls into powder in the pan, which flashes through the flash hole and sets off the main charge. Now, since it's unloaded and we put no powder in the pan, I'll show you the spark. That's what sets it off. And bang, and then it goes like that. This is not one of these things that takes a long time. Bang, it goes just like that. But as a smoothbore, this is a great military weapon because you can load it and fire it quite a few times before the fouling from the powder, and that's the residue that builds up, before that gets so great that you can't ram another ball down there. So you can fire this quite a few times. And it's done, the military, from a paper cartridge. Now if I were hunting with this gun, I might load right out of my powder horn into a measure, down the barrel, put a ball and some wadding on top, prime the piece, and then I'm ready to shoot. As a smoothbore, I can shoot one large round ball, like for deer and bear. I can shoot shot, like for turkeys and rabbits and the kind of small game like that. Or, if I want to choose in a military setting, I can do both. It's called buck and ball. It's quite a load going downrange as far as spreading out some. But in order to load one of those things, you put it on half cock, you bite off the end of the cartridge. In here would then a lead ball. It's a paper cylinder and a charge of powder behind it. So the soldier bites off the end. Now a good soldier has at least 2 teeth, and hopefully and if you know anything about oral hygiene in the 18th century, you know that ain't funny. You know, those ladies, those beautiful, those wealthy ladies, the beautiful gowns that stacked up here, they give you a smile and they got black teeth. Because it was, they didn't know anything about it. There is no such thing as germs theory. They don't know there's bacteria and viruses and all this kind of stuff. They got a whole other thing. Don Turpinning was around. Don Turpinning does 18th century doctor. He can tell you all about what we thought the human body acted like. Well, anyhow, once that soldier bit that off, he primed that piece, he threw that down, he went and he poured the powder in, shoved that paper with the ball in it. He hauled out this ramrod, and he shoved that all the way down to the breech end. And if you didn't have a ramrod, you didn't shoot, because this thing gets stuck in there, and it's not all the way on the back, right down into the breech, bang, could blow a hole in the gun, blow a hole, pieces flying all over the place, could kill you. But then he was ready to fire. And this thing was fully loaded. Now, we were back actually in the middle of October 7th up at Saratoga. And it's a little roundabout way to tell you about what a rifle could do. Now, a rifle has got grooves that are cut in the barrel that spiral all the way down to the breech. And what that'll do is once you load that powder charge and you load a ball on top of that with a patch around it, it really is pressed right into those grooves. You fire, that thing spins like a gyroscope. Now, most of us here, I can see, are old enough to have played with gyroscopes, and maybe some have no idea what they are because they're young, but that really stabilizes things. This is good out to about 80 yards. I can hit a man fair size at about 80 yards with this. He's in trouble. And a rifleman who was pretty good could hit a pumpkin the size of a man's head at 200 yards. So this is really a devastating weapon of its time, and particularly to British troops who believe, and as we all may, that in battle, if you're killed, that's God's will. Because these things, not being terribly accurate, they're flying, metal's flying all over the place, and if you happen to be hit, well, that was just fate, or however you like to look at it. To have some scum colonist with a rifle flop down on his belly, take aim, and pop you off at 200 yards, a nobleman, that is outrageous. That is murder. And they were pretty upset. Well, Dan Morgan, he took some of his boys and he says, get up in the trees, get down here. You see that? You see that general down there? He's a great man, but he has to die. And those riflemen shot him down off that horse. And that turned the tide. October 7th, the Americans won, and John Burgoyne was now in retreat. He's going back. He actually ends up surrendering October 17th, but back to Kingston. We didn't know that yet. Around October 6th, well, just before that, October 5th or so, Henry Clinton, the British commander in New York, says, we better do something to try to help John Burgoyne out, because he's in big trouble. So he gets together shipping, which is any number of vessels of all different sizes, and he puts about 1,500 troops on them, and he sends them upriver. First thing they got to do is they've got to navigate sunken ships around Forts Lee and Fort Washington, which is right next to Fort Lee, New Jersey. But because you've had Tories down there scouting this out forever, the British knew how to zigzag in and out of those sunken ships. Then they go past the Chevaux de Frise down near Beacon, a little below there. That is, Chevaux de Frise is like logs put together like this, and these are huge logs, and they're sunk in the river so that if a ship runs up against that, it's going to punch a hole right in the hull. But again, the Tories have been watching out there. They tell them, and they navigate through that. Around the 6th of October, the British are off Fort Montgomery and Clinton. That's by West Point. There's a chain across there. They can't get any further without getting rid of that chain. And so they land some of those troops below Fort Montgomery, and they march overland with full packs and attack the rear of that fort. George Clinton, our general, fights like crazy, but he loses that fort and he loses Fort Clinton. They're driven out, and they have to regroup. What's going to happen next? Well, the British ships can sail right up the river, and if they're not opposed, then they might go all the way to Albany. They might actually divert troops from General Gates at Saratoga and give John Burgoyne a little bit of an edge. But they don't know yet that it's too late. But it does come to a point where they do find that out. And they decide, because they're now hopping mad, that they want to do something. We have a rogue galley sitting in the mouth of the Sopus Creek. Now, a rogue galley is kind of a fairly large, flat deck, flat bottom boat that has big oars, so it's quite maneuverable. And on that boat, they have a 32-pound cannon. Now, that pound part isn't what the cannon weighs, that's what the cannonball weighs. And a 32-pound cannonball is about that big, and that will punch a hole in your ship, something fierce. So they get up there, and what do we great residents of Kingston do? Knowing this huge fleet is up there, it's coming up and it's full of troops. Why don't we shoot at them? we let fly and all that, and they kind of shoot back and forth, and nothing much happens. But it is enough to really tick off the British general on board. The Navy guy in command, the British Navy, was Wallace, Commodore Wallace, and General Vaughan was the troop commander of the Army forces. Well, he decides, as he put it in his letters, to burn out that nest of rebels, because we were the capital of New York State, and this was a very important town, that he was going to go and he was going to do just that. So what are we doing in order to stop him from burning out our town? The town that we looked at, and we saw the horizon was different, we smelled the burning wood and the ashes and all that thing. Well, remember, most of our troops are either at Saratoga or they're now with Clinton's army and they're retreating toward Kingston. This is a race. George Clinton knows that if he doesn't get to Kingston before those British fleet can get here, that Kingston could be lost. And he's right about that. They're marching as fast as they can. They're moving with great speed over no roads, and they're shadowing that British fleet. That is, they can see them in the river. The Brits can see his forces up there marching along, shadowing them. On the evening of October 15th, they anchor off the Sopus Point down there. And on the next day, the 16th, they begin a bombardment. We shot at them, they're shooting back. Not too much happens with that, but about 1 o'clock in the afternoon, the boats begin to arrive on shore. It's just like landing, you watch the World War II movies and you see that stuff on D-Day coming in like that. Well, not quite, but in longboats with oars, with soldiers stuffed on them, they do that very same thing, and they land right down around where Kingston Beach is. Between there and around the corner, they're coming in on those boats, they disembark. The only thing, remember, the militia, as most other ways, is old men and boys are left under Colonel Johannes Snyder in order to keep the British at bay. Well, they're completely overmatched. The Brits advance on the cannons that are down in the Ponconky area. We have a battery down there and a remnant of soldiers, militia soldiers. Again, let me set this down. I want to show you what that looked like. If you're standing there and they're firing the cannon and these British troops are, let's say that they're under somewhat of a formal type of an order. They're going to form up and they're looking at that battery and they're at the shoulder. They're going to get a command, fix your bayonet. Down it comes down like this, out comes the bayonet, and you're up again. Shoulder firearms, and you're up, and you're ready like this. And we back up just to make sure we have enough room. Charge! Tell me if I ruin a good thing. Charge your bayonet! It comes down like that. Now, you're talking about maybe having 200-300 people in red coats, and because you choose that color because it's formidable. When you put that in rank and you see all that coming, it's formidable. And this is not one of these things you see in a Civil War movie where, everybody's running helter-skelter all over the place. This was a solid, unbroken line. Starts moving towards you, first at a walk, and then at a quick walk, and then at a trot. And this thing is coming on down right at you. And they're probably at this point being encouraged to yell things like, "For George, for the king and country." And they're going in with the bayonet. Well, tell you what I would do. I'm out of here. And that's exactly what they did. It was a smart thing to do. So they spiked their cannon. And that has nothing to do with pouring liquor in it. No. There's a lot of these terms you read, but you've never seen how it's done. You've got a cannon, which a little later on we'll have a half-size carronade over at the person house. But the front end of the thing, down where the powder charge, down where the ball goes. Okay, in the back is the flash hole, just like on this gun, small flash hole, large bore on the other end. So somebody comes and they might capture your artillery. Well, shoot, they can turn that thing around, load it up, it ain't hard, and shoot right back at you with your own guns. So what you have is a long, thin spike. It's made out of some kind of metal. It's either iron or maybe it's copper or brass. You take that thing, you jam it down in that flash hole, you twist it around and break it off. If you can't put powder in there, there's no point in loading the thing. It's not going to flash through. And it takes quite a while to have some artillerist, an artificer, go in there with some tool and pull that out and get that down. So you've saved, at least yourself, if you didn't save your gun. And if you happen to drive those troops back and regain your gun, you can do that same thing and make it operable again later on. So that's what the British do down along the Rondout Creek. They charge, Americans take off, spike the guns, British get down there in the Rondout Creek area. What do they find? Well, there's a couple of, and they fire the shipping, which means that they set the whole thing on fire down here. Were there any casualties? The only thing that I have read so far in any of the letters that I've been able to look at is that there was a British lieutenant and his squad managed to somehow be too close to powder that blew up, and it just says they were blown up. And I kind of get the feeling that they weren't killed, but they were injured when this thing went boom and all the stuff flew around, they all got knocked down. While those guys are down there just laying waste to Rondout, down where the Hudson River Maritime Museum is where all that happened, right down in there. The American troops are taken off back up the creek. The Lady Washington, who started this all off of that 32-pound gun, she's backing up like crazy. They're rolling like us because, the British come down that creek, they capture that boat, we're done. So they get back up, a couple of miles back up there by Eddyville. What are you going to do with the boat? They're going to destroy it. We got a trick we can do ourselves. We're going to sink her. Yeah, sinking, you can't burn it. And so they scuttled Lady Washington. She went down to the bottom of the creek, could not be burned. Later on, an American engineer came and actually raised that up so it could be used again. But they saved the Lady Washington by sinking her. And so, we're pretty much shot down there in the Rondout area. If we don't, we can do. There's another column that's landed that's going up the hill toward the village, 300 structures, and the two meet up. And there were a couple of people who worked for the Senate House some years back who managed to map out, they got a grant, map out that route that those British soldiers came up, and they put up signs along the way with that Burning of Kingston logo on there to show you exactly the way that British troops came up here. So they come, the two forces meet, they're heading toward the town. Most of what we know is the stockade right up in here. They pick up a guy, so it said, a loyalist named Lefferts, who tells them about how to get here and what's the best way to go and all that kind of thing. And they're up, come into the town, and there's nobody there. It's completely undefended, as far as we know. Maybe they were shot at a little bit from the woods on their way up, but there's no great resistance. We've all actually very smartly taken off, even though we left homes and everything that we owned that couldn't be carried away. It only takes the British a short time. They break into small groups, they get their torches out, they run around putting torches to the houses. Why are they in a hurry? George Clinton is on his way. And I don't think they really want to face him off if they don't have to. But he's a little bit behind because they've managed to get up there and they've managed to set fire to the entire city. It burns to the ground. 300 structures where 3,000 or 4,000 people had lived. And they rally together, get back in a group, and head back down to those ships to get out of here. Because, as you say, George Clinton is on his way. He's got a fairly substantial force, even though they've been beaten with at least 1,000 men. I didn't do that. Is there anybody near a switch? No, you don't want to put it back on. Use an odd phrase, but the British are hot-footing out of here because they really don't want to face another battle. They want to get back on the ship and continue up north, even though that by now they know that Burgoyne is surrendering, that it doesn't really make much difference for them getting to Albany, plus the fact that we've got troops on either side of the river now that are shadowing them along. There's not much they can do to land. They're going to be opposed by large-scale forces. They take with them, at this point, this is 1777, there is no British anti-slavery law yet. It was around 1805. Any black slave that they find up here, they take with them. That's property. They're going. It's not like they get a break. They just get owned by somebody else. And they take them with them down the hill, anything else that they can carry. There's only one house that didn't get burned, and that's that stone house that's near the George Washington School. That one was not burned. And there's all kinds of stories why that is. They said there was a Tory lady lived there, and General Vaughan was really enamored with her. Nobody really knows why, but only one survived. It was a little too far outside of things, and nobody happened to get there. But by now, George Clinton's troops are just about to Kingston. And when they get there, right over Port Ewan, you got all those towers that come up there, the cell towers and all that stuff, that nice big bluff. His advanced forces get there, and they look up toward Kingston, and all there is a column of smoke. They know they're too late. The city's gone. There's nothing they can do about it. They march on in to Kingston to take over what's left of the city and do what they can. When the people start coming back, you drive your cattle and such that you send out into the woods so that the British didn't have time to go get them. You drive your cattle back, you bring it back in, you accumulate what you can, but the city is gone. So what do you do next? Well, the 1st Ulster County Militia, under General Johannes Snyder, was entrusted with the major job of rebuilding the city. And boy, they did it pretty fast. Remember, now you're living with your relatives, your friends, anybody else who would be willing to take you in, and people did take you in on those times. You shared quite a lot. And the city was rebuilt in rather short order, even though as a state capital, it moved to Hurley and some other places before it ended up in Poughkeepsie. And if you go down to Poughkeepsie and you go up to White Street, Main and White Street, you can see George Clinton, one of George Clinton's homes right there, where business was conducted as part of the New York State Capitol at that time. We put it back together. One of the good things that happened was Christopher Tappan, who was a deputy county clerk, saved all the records. He managed to get 10 wagons together at a time when the Continental Army was confiscating a whole lot of wagons and wagoners and livestock in order to move Continental Army business around. He managed to get that all together. Why was that important? Well, you know, if I come back and say, well, that's where my house was, it's my property lines are over here and over there, and my neighbor would never like me, but I'd say, oh no, that's my property, comes over here, whatever. Because of Mr. Tappan's work, at least in one small way, all that was still preserved. We knew who had what and where. Plus all the records of marriages and births, all the local laws, everything that went into operating a government and a community had been preserved because this man said, hey, you know, nobody else is doing it, I'm doing it. So we owe him quite a lot as far as our records, and the county clerk's office still has those records. We have them now. Now, with just a few minutes left, does anybody have any questions about anything that I've spoken of, left out, embellished too much on?
Larry, you heard that General Van Arnold disobeyed the usual protocol and on horseback went and killed some of the officers. That's ever told you?
From his own or somebody
Oh,
else?
Chris.
Well, what he did, he got the big tip. Him and Gates didn't like each other at all. And they got the big tip, and Gates said, you are confined to your tent, you are under arrest. Well, the battle is going on. And Arnold, who really is one heck of a warrior, he is facing back as and so he gets out. He gets on his horse and he goes peering into the battle. It is said at that point that he rallied some troops around him, charged one of the redoubts, which is a kind of an open fortification that was being held by the Hessians, swept in there, pushed them out, wiped them out like that, was shot in the leg, and there is a monument up there to that bullet wound in his leg. And that was one of the things when he was courting Peggy Shippen that he was limping about, was the bullet wound in that leg, and was a hero of the day because he disobeyed Gates.
Peggy Shippen was enamored with John Andre, right?
Yes, I believe she was, but then I think a lot of ladies, John Andre was a favorite. He was you know, one of those kind of guys that, like every marriageable girl would like to meet. Well, we had, you know, John Andre, he met kind of a, not such a good end as a spy, and he was hung by George Washington. But out of this whole battle here, this whole thing of Fort Montgomery and Clinton, chasing the British up to here, burning Kingston, all that, there was a fellow named Daniel Taylor, and sometimes he has a different first name, but I kind of know him as Daniel Taylor. He was a messenger for Henry Clinton, general out of New York, to take a message to John Burgoyne at Saratoga. From what I read, it wasn't a terribly important message. It was almost like Henry Clinton saying, "Oh, well, you know, you come on your own, we'll do what we can," you know, but it wasn't anything earth-shattering. So he gets accosted by troops, and he sees, oh, they got red coats. Oh, they must be British troops. And so he, you know, gets real friendly, slides up there on his horse, and he says, I want to go to General Clinton. And they weren't British troops, they were American troops and captured British coats that had not yet been dyed blue, which they would have been, but they were red coats. Well, of course, these guys are going, hey, okay, we'll take it. And they do, and he's very much surprised to find it is George, not Henry Clinton, who he has seen. Well, this message is in a silver ball, the size of a musket ball, a little screw in the back that holds it together. It's hollow. If you go to Fort Ticonderoga at the right time, because they shift over their displays, you will see that message musket ball. It wasn't a real deal. So he gets down there and realizes, oh my God, it's George Clinton. He takes that ball, he swallows it down. So the officers grab him, they slam him down, they call in the doctor. The doctor gives him an emetic. You know what that is? You put it down and blah, it comes up. That's just what they do. I'm sure they were like, you're not doing this. And poured it down in there, and boom, up comes this, you know, with all the other stuff. There's that musket ball. So they all die for it, but Taylor gets it first. They said, "I tell you what we'll do. You either cough it up or we'll get it out of here." He coughed it up, and when they unscrewed it, there was a message from Clinton. Burgoyne confessed to being a spy. Well, he's a messenger. He said, "I'm not a spy." And they took him along. The orderly books of Clinton's army. The orderly book is what happened every day in the regiment. They put down the major and even the most minor things. His name shows up on those books until the 18th of October. It's just gone. The orderly books don't say anything about where he went. Well, out in Hurley, there was a nice tree, and he was kept out there in one of the buildings, and he ended up being swung from that tree as a spy. I'm sure that those troops were pretty kicked off by that time, and there was no mercy was going to be offered. That's what happened to Mr. Taylor. Anybody have any other questions?
I was just wondering, if you're referring to winter was going on that tree in ground, I would imagine there's many records of the people illness and things that were followed, the fact that they have to shelter there.
There may be, but I haven't really looked at them. If you were really interested in medical stuff, you could probably search that down in some way. It would take a lot of doing and probably a pretty interesting book. Anybody else?
The Native Americans fought. They fought with the British and they fought with the Americans. Native Americans, which troops fought with them?
Well,
Or which tribes?
nothing much happened around here with Native Americans because they've been all driven out of this area long before. However, up on the Mohawk River, and I've done a lot of reenacting up there, that was the territory of the Iroquois. At the close end, towards Schenectady and that, you have the Mohawks. On the far end is the Seneca. This little artifact, the neck knife, is actually an Iroquois type of thing because when you have a material culture that does not use pockets, you have to keep the knife handy. And this is how that was done. So we have the Oneidas, who are around Oneida Lake, who side with the Americans, and all the other nations side with the British. More or less. They were basically really trying to side with themselves and play one white group against the other white group because they know that whoever won, they lost. They knew that. That's we do have people like there are Stockbridge Indians from Stockbridge, Massachusetts, who were very much Christianized by that time, who formed units in the Continental Army and the local militias.
We know that the British kind of snuck around in the river. Claremont was burned. We live in Saunders, so we see where they were anchored at Malvern. There's a story about there being a cannonball in the minder's house. Any records of any local farms being burned or looted, or in the barns must be full at this point?
Well, let's see. I know that there were residences and farms burned around Rhinecliff, because now going back across the river and up around Claremont. At that point, Vaughan knew that it was pointless to try to go any further. In fact, the American forces were really gathering on either side of the river. He claims that it was an ill wind, that they had the wind blowing at them, so they really couldn't get any further up, and so they decided to turn around and go back down. There were other reports that said, no, it's coming from the south. But, any good reason to say, well, it's hopeless at this point. I'm going to go back. And they scoot through the Chevauche Freeze, and by then, of course, since they took Fort Clinton and Montgomery, they chopped the chain, and they were able to make it back to New York. And they had a
Follow-up. I know that as part of the kind of reenactment stuff you speak at, there's two certificates to sign, whether you be loyal to the king or whether you be signed on with the patriots. How divided was Kingston at that time?
My understanding is Kingston is solidly patriot, and called themselves patriots at the time. If you get a little further up around Shandaken, and part of the 1st Ulster Militia was stationed at Fort Shandaken, there's a fairly strong loyalist element up there. Loyalists at the time meant somebody that was politically more conservative, not really much different from the patriots, but they sided with the King of England. So you have a loyalist element there. If you scoot over the mountains a little bit to what's the the top end of Schoharie Valley, there's a very strong loyalist element there. There's a couple of horse cavalry charge in the Revolution allegedly happened up in that area. I saw that reenacted.
Do you recommend any good books on 17th, 18th century Kingston County, or there's not really?
Oh, I think there's a lot of them, actually. Anything that Ed Ford writes has got to be good. Alf Evers, before him, wrote quite a few books about the area. There are a lot of general kinds of books about the Revolutionary War, about 18th century life. Kind of, if you do a Google search with a topic, that'll give you more than you really want to know. Anybody else? I think we're ready now. At the time, and we're supposed to move along to the next thing. Thank you.